that we're in on barriers to large-scale renewable deployment, and that's transmission policies. And the big part that I'd emphasize about what we're about is we're sort of, if you like, we're everything but engineering, but we're very interested in science and engineering. But we have some engineers, but who've seen the light and become more economist-like, which is good. So the point here is that technology is a key part of the energy solutions. We certainly can't disagree with that. But there are many technologically feasible things out there, the first being obvious carbon pricing. Today I was quite heartened to read that now, the New York Times' Thomas Friedman actually thinks we should price carbon as opposed to subsidize green, which I take to be a real benefit here to the policymaking process, that he's actually now advocating at least the least cost solution. But still, political feasibility makes that difficult. Transmission, another one in my favorite area is dynamic pricing. People seem to have a tremendous aversion to that, given that it actually requires them to take some effort. So a lot of things have a significant social science, regulatory, legal, political component, and that's really what we're about, is bringing together those areas of economics, political science, business, law, and regulatory. We've been in the FSI since 2001, and this just gives you a listing of some of the things we've worked on. And since we do teach a course in the business school as well, we've learned how to draw diagrams like this. And put little arrows in the appropriate places. And this just gives you a sampling of the papers that have been produced in each of these areas. I'm certainly not going to go through any of them. John Anderson, as graduate student here, is going to talk about his work, so I'll just note that. But just you'll get a copy of these slides, and so please visit our website. We don't get paid for hits, but we get psychic pleasure from them. So, and this is in the area of business strategy as well as finally regulatory policy. So we work both domestically and internationally, hence we're in the FSI, which is the Institute for International Studies. So what else do we do in terms of teaching? We've taught a course in the business school. It's called Business Models for Sustainable Energy. And in some sense, it's a bait and switch because the students think it's about sustainability. No, it's about a sustainable business, because that's the most important thing in business, is staying in business. And so that's what sustainable and sustainable energy meant in the course. And it really is focusing on this technology economics and thinking about the fact that you really need to get all of those things coordinated to have a viable business in the energy space. The other is we are big into supporting graduate students. Because after all, they do all the work and we take all the credit. So a lot of them are economics as well as in political science and other areas, but it's sort of project specific and skill specific basis that we look for students. The other is we also have some full-time researchers, because it is really something where there's a considerable amount of scale up in terms of understanding the institutions of what you're dealing with. But, and also it makes information transfer pretty easy. The other thing we do is we have an annual conference. And this is the public service portion of the talk, is this year we have a conference that's co-sponsored by all these fantastic places. And there's limited space available for interested graduate students. And so if what you want is you send me, the first few people who send me an email with serious interest, we'll sign you up and you can come. It's tomorrow. This is the agenda. And we have folks from, the industry, project developers, financial communities. Basically, the idea here is, I'm a firm believer from a lot of my work in the policymaking process, that if you essentially bring everybody together in the same room, the level of what we'll call not really credible arguments starts to go way down, and you actually begin to make progress. And so that's really part of the goal of these conferences. And then the other is just we can't resist writing op-eds and things like that. And so first I'll just give you a brief discussion, and there'll be a quiz portion for you, so pay attention, on the reducing the regulatory barriers to the low carbon energy services. So the idea is that we are interested in reducing the amount of low-carbon energy services simply because of the fact that we're worried about global warming. And smart grid technologies can be a part of that. We won't spend too much time on that today, but the thing we're going to really be talking about is essentially renewable energy, is deploying renewable energy as a way to displace fossil fuel-based energy with renewable energy that we hope is at least zero carbon energy. And so this creates some challenges. Here's sort of the top four. It's intermittent. In other words, you get it when the resource is available. The other is it's non-dispatchable in the sense that you can't crank it up when you want. Probably the only place you get more is Sacramento, but it's not useful wind energy, that's dispatchable. That's a joke that takes a while to get. But location specific, in other words, it exists where the resource is. And the good news is it is zero variable cost, so when it is there, you're going to take it. It beats any fossil fuel short on a variable cost basis. So the trouble is that the transmission network that we had was designed to serve dispatchable power plants that operate with extremely high levels of reliability. So for example, a nuclear power plant right now has roughly about a 90-95% capacity factor, which means of the potential energy it could produce in the year, it's producing roughly 90-95%. Combined cycle coal-fired power plants are similarly high, not that high, whereas a good wind facility, say in California, or a solar facility in California, is probably in the 20 to 25% range, and those are good capacity factors for them. And unfortunately, typically it comes when you don't want it, which is in the middle of the night, or when the wind blows a lot, obviously. So this has really led to a major paradigm shift in how we think about transmission. And the other thing is the presence of wholesale markets. So in a wholesale market, transmission serves a whole important purpose of it is really the facilitator of commerce, in the sense that if I'm a generator located behind a congested transmission line, I basically can name my price because no other power can get in. And so transmission becomes a way to open up the market, face me with more competition, make me become a more aggressive competitor. And so this is another challenge of this new regime. Since wholesale markets exist virtually in the entire eastern United States, they exist in ERCOT, which is the Texas interconnection, and they exist in California. And so it really is important to understand and plan transmission with that in mind. So the way that's been chosen to meet renewable goals is what are called renewable portfolio standards. These typically say you've got to have a pre-specified share of your retail load obligation as a utility. It has to come from designated renewable sources. And the thing that's interesting is virtually all the states are pretty far behind in meeting their RPS goals. And a big barrier here is the transmission infrastructure. It's just not there to support it, for the simple reason that, guess what, people don't like to live where it's really windy and really, really hot. And so California has a 20% RPS that was supposed to be met by 2010, but that didn't stop the state from enacting a 33% renewable by 2020 that would, and just to show you, these are all the other states. The important thing I just want you to take from this is everybody's following California, none as aggressively as California in terms of a 33% goal. The trouble is California is in some sense not going the right direction. As you can see, Southern California is getting pretty close, but the way that these guys are getting closer is unfortunately not the way that we'd like them to get closer, which is the denominator's falling, right? Is the level of economic activity is quite correlated with the level of load, and this is the total amount of generation in California, it's falling. So one way to get a higher renewable energy share is just have a lower amount of total energy you consume, but that kind of has the downside that we all know about. So that there is this, it is, so the good news on compliance is there, but the bad news is that it's mostly becoming as a result of the decline in the economy. So this is just to give you an idea of the ambitiousness of what's in mind if we're going to hit even the 20% RPS by 2020, okay, given that we think there's going to be load growth. These are various scenarios that are telling you how much capacity we've got to build under various load growth scenarios. And just to give you a comparison, from the period 2003, 8 years, we built 2 gigawatts under the California RPS program. We are envisioning building almost 10 times that amount in a 9-year period, okay? So It's tough. And one might be skeptical of the ability of the state to actually achieve that. And that's where it really comes in to the issue of transmission. The good news is, in the sense that California lives within the Western interconnection. And the bad news is the interconnections aren't that great between neighboring control areas. And so the real issue is the other side of the case is that transmission is a small fraction of the delivered price of electricity. All right, so transmission upgrades may increase retail prices just a little, but could give us access to a lot of very inexpensive renewable energy located outside the state. And so, it's, as we said here, it's hard to see, given what I've showed you, that we're going to be able to meet this with all internal resources, in spite of what is said in Sacramento. And just to give you an example, here is sort of a quick map of think of it as the closer you get to blue, the better off your wind resources are. In terms of, and so what I want you to do is study that map and notice that you don't see a lot of blues in California. And then the good news, though, is that we are a pretty good solar source for photovoltaic, as well as for solar, concentrating solar thermal. But, you know, the rest of, there's a lot of good places in Arizona as well, all right? And the other thing that's interesting is that nobody lives where all the good wind resources are, and nobody lives where all the good solar resources are, so there's probably not a lot of transmission out there to bring those to the major load centers. Now, there's been some action on the policy front to try to address that. It hasn't, on the whole, been much success. For example, in the Energy Policy Act of 2005, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was given authority to designate strategic transmission corridors. This did not go very well. One of them that was designated was the Palo Verde-Devers corridor, which brings in power from Arizona into Southern California. For those of you who might remember September 8th, which just a few days ago, where there was the big blackout, it could have maybe been helped with that upgrade, but we won't go into that. So the idea here is that we need to think of ways to get it. And this just shows you that these are entire interconnected Western United States, interconnected Eastern United States, Texas, that's so they can secede, they're their own interconnection. But basically, an electron injected anywhere in the West is as good as an electron injected anywhere else. And so the idea is, let's get them where they're the cheapest. So what we're about is trying to figure out ways to essentially look at both quantifying the benefits of these expansions and quantifying the interconnection-wide benefits. So for example, local, more expensive renewable generation that requires less transmission versus distant, lower cost generation that requires more transmission. And, you know, so we have a lot of sort of modeling sorts of projects ongoing looking at that. We're also thinking in terms of regulatory design and as well as learning from international experience. So now the quiz question. So given that I've told you that regulatory policy is important, technology is important, your first question is, where is the most amount of wind power being produced in the United States right now? And no one over the age of 40 is allowed to answer this question for the simple reason that you've been in these talks before. But students can answer.
Texas.
Texas. Now, why is that?
Because it's an open market.
Well, there you go. He must be from Texas. Check that out. Lots of the purple stuff. So we've got the triple threat, right? We've got the fact that the resource is great. We've got the fact that Texas is its own interconnection. So the Texas PUC runs the wholesale market and the retail market in Texas. And we've got the fact that Texas has the CREZ policy, which is competitive renewable energy zones. And what that does is builds the transmission given where they know the renewable resource is, and then says, guys, come build the resource because the transmission's there. Okay, now you got that question, right? Where's the second highest amount of deployment of wind energy in the United States?
Iowa.
Oh, you guys are good. Why?
There's wind there.
That's true. There's wind there, but there's no people. So what's going on? Well, what's going on, and that's the second part of the talk that I can't give, but Iowa is right next to Illinois, where lots of people do live. What does Illinois have? Illinois has what we can talk about later, but not now, is they have a renewable energy credit market, which separates the production of renewable energy from the production of energy. And they allow imports to sell RECs into Illinois to meet the compliance with Illinois' renewable energy. So you're a guy in Iowa, there's an interconnection between Iowa and Illinois, you can basically sell your renewable power to Illinois. You don't need a lot of transmission upgrades because they already exist. And so there you go. So regulation and policy works again. All right, so the last part I'll just skip is dynamic pricing, which is my, as you can see, my pet area of interest, because that's the other side of the game of managing intermittency, is you got to get demand to go away. You do that with the price. And so now I'll turn it over to John.